2021 is set to go down as the year of the time loop game, and Deathloop, the brand new game from famed developer Arkane, is set to be the biggest and most bombastic entry in this subgenre yet. Here, you play as a man called Colt, who, after being brutally murdered in the game's opening moments, quickly realizes that he's reliving the same day over and over again. Upon either his death or the day just finishing, he's thrown back to a beach where he wakes up with the world's worst hangover. Playing as Colt, your job is to break this loop. The way to do that is to assassinate 8 visionaries, very powerful enemies that are scattered across the game's 4 areas before the day comes to a close. That's easier said than done though, as Juliana, the only other person who knows they're in a time loop apart from Colt, is out to hunt you down. Oh, and Juliana herself just so happens to be controlled by another real-life player. The first thing you'll notice about Deathloop though when you boot it up is just how full of personality it is. Set in an alternate 1970s on the fictional Black Reef Island, the music, aesthetic and charm of the game is instantly inviting. The pumping score, grindhouse color palette, and the eccentricities of the environment, from lavish party plazas to nuclear bunkers that have become the home of debauched artists, all work in tandem to give Deathloop such a strong identity that you just can't help but fall right in love with. Colt and Juliana themselves are at the heart of this as well. Their rivalry is of course fleshed out and deepened over the course of the game, but the great thing is that you instantly buy into it. You get the feeling that they've done this before, and that sense of history is immediately there the first time they interact. The writing absolutely shines when the two of them are just butting heads, quipping insults at one another in a way that is playful yet genuinely threatening. You know that Juliana can follow through on what she's saying. Considering that she's just mostly a voiceover on the radio who chimes in to taunt Colt, Juliana is given a real sense of presence, and these conversations, for as funny as they might be on the surface, do offer tidbits of juicier information that both you and Colt can piece together to flesh out the plot. The performances from Jason E. Kelly and Ozioma Akaga are really sublime. They're some of the most standout performances of the entire year so far. They run the full gamut of emotions together, and they have such a palpable electric chemistry that you can't help but love the banter between them in the game. The thing you'll notice after you notice the game's personality though is just how much freedom you have when you're playing Deathloop. While a lengthy tutorial does admittedly take its time to lay out the exact rules of the loop and the objectives that you need to accomplish, after that you're pretty much free to explore the game's 4 main areas. Though you have objectives, you're encouraged first and foremost to familiarize yourself with each location, identifying key paths through areas, where your targets are, and clues that may help you unlock interesting weapons or avenues to assassinations. To do so, you're going to be going up against plenty of Eternalists, the regular enemies that are out to stop you from breaking the loop. Once again, the game gives you the freedom to deal with these nuisances as you see fit. You've got your regular stealth mechanics that have you either ghosting through levels or getting close for a stealth kill. You've got the ability to hack into turrets and turn them on your side, and of course, you've got your regular arsenal of weapons to go in guns blazing. Sadly, said arsenal is a little bit of a mixed bag. Like a lot of action games, Deathloop comes with a color-coded tiered system when it comes to its loot. Consequently, you're going to be seeing a lot of variations on the same basic weapons. You know, your sniper rifles, your magnums, your silenced pistols, your shotguns, things like that. Now, some of these variations do add cool qualifiers, like the ability to shoot poison, for instance, and the base weapons do admittedly handle very well, but a few more wouldn't have gone amiss because it feels like you see a lot of the weaponry very early on in the game. In fact, the best and most inventive weapons in the game are ones that you have to unlock through side missions, and while that's awesome, they are kind of few and far between, and you won't see many of them until the late game. As it stands, it's kind of too easy to get stuck with a gun that you like very early on and then just use it for most of the game and not really experiment. Fortunately, the gunplay itself is punchy and impactful, and headshots in particular come with such a satisfying sense of heft. You feel kind of way too dangerous when you just splatter some dude's noggin. Mechanically, it's a big step up from Arkane's Prey, though it does take some time to be as smooth as you want it to be. That's because some early game weapons don't really do a good job to reflect just how satisfying and visceral combat can be later on, while enemies are on high alert and extremely aggressive, making you as fragile as you should be. You can play the game as a straight shooter, but Deathloop is at its best when you're inventively mixing and matching powers and weapons to cause utter chaos. And while not a consistent problem, the stealth system can sometimes feel a little bit cheap at times. For instance, especially in the late game, enemies had a habit of seeing me through brick walls when I was sneaking and shouldn't have been seen at all. And while it wasn't a huge problem, it did crop up more than a few times, at least enough for me to notice, and that kind of sucked when it would ruin a whole run and I'd have to either restart the level or restart the entire day. Again, it's a small issue and not everyone will run into this bug, I'm sure, but I ran into it and it kind of sucked. What adds to these basic gameplay elements though is the inclusion of slab powers. You acquire these by killing specific visionaries, and you can equip 2 at a time when you jump into any level. If you've played Dishonored, a lot of these will be familiar, with the shift ability giving you a short-range teleport to reach new areas, while Nexus links the consciousness of enemies together, meaning that killing one will kill them all. While already incredibly powerful, you can upgrade these slabs as well by repeatedly killing these same targets, allowing you to further tailor the gameplay and these powers to your own playstyle. Now, while the idea of tying these upgrades to targets that you've already taken out might sound like a recipe for repetition, it actually encourages you to go back to previous missions and experiment with how you take these guys out and which route you take through the levels. Yeah, you could just jump back in that same level and take the guy out in the exact same way, or you could use information that you gleaned on your first assassination attempt to experiment with a different run, or try some different weapons, or try some different powers. It really rewards you for doing that and playing in that way. So while being inventive isn't necessary to get these upgrades, you are encouraged to do so, and experimenting does have the reward at the end of it when you finally do take them out and you get the upgrade anyway, making you more powerful. And despite being built around reliving the same day over and over again, Deathloop is not built to waste your time, which I'm sure many people will be thankful for. As each run begins, you get the option to visit one of the 4 core locations at one of the 4 times of day, either in the morning, in the noon, in the afternoon, or in the evening. Visiting a specific area at a different time of day not only comes with a new visual style, but also a brand new set of encounters and side missions to boot, making sure you're constantly seeing new things tens of hours in. Even better, once you're inside these levels, time actually won't progress forward until you go to the exit, and it's only then that you move from, say, noon to the afternoon. This structure keeps the premise in focus at all times. You know you're always in a time loop, but it also doesn't burden you with anything that's unfun or any kind of pressure to complete your objectives in a certain amount of time. Unlike in similar games, as time doesn't move in the levels, you can take as long as you like exploring, experimenting, and killing without worrying about ticking down the clock. Of course, you could die, but even then the game is really generous and you get 2 continues per time of day per level that allow you to reset and respawn without completely resetting the entire day. Consequently, players have a certain level of control over the loop itself, and it stops it from feeling like a ball and chain that's tied to your ankle, or some kind of, like I said before, burden stopping you from having fun. When the day ends as well, or if you bite the dust of course, enough of your progress carries over that you don't feel like you're wasting your time, but instead you always feel like you're getting stronger, you're getting smarter, and you're getting closer to your end goal. Initially, you start each new day scavenging weapons and power-ups. However, an in-game resource called Residium allows you to infuse loadout items to stay in your inventory permanently between these runs. So with each new run then, you're tangibly getting stronger as you build out these loadouts of doohickeys and weapons and trinkets that are ultimately going to make for more fun and more inventive and stronger future runs. It's more than just the trinkets and the guns that you carry through from day to day though, but the knowledge of world events that you could exploit on future runs. The brilliance of Deathloop's mission structure is that apart from killing the visionaries, all of the setup missions you only have to do one time. Acquiring this knowledge, whether it's learning exactly where a visionary will be at a certain time of day or finding a code to a door, is archived after discovering it, minimizing any needless repetition and allowing you to always build on your progress. Even smaller clues that you might get from a note or overhearing some NPC dialogue is banked as well, always giving you some threads to follow up on every single time you start a new day. In each run, you're only really limited by your own imagination. Arkane have done a superb job of making the world of Deathloop feel incredibly interactive, with each system and mechanic creating a domino effect if pushed in the right way. The gameplay absolutely excels when you're thinking on the spot and improvising and using the world around you to your advantage. And of course, knowing exactly where the opportunities to do this come from only comes from the knowledge that you'd learn by repeating the levels and going through them over and over again. The final piece of the core gameplay though is suitably Juliana herself. As mentioned earlier, Juliana is controlled controlled by a real-life player who can invade your game and try to kill you and stop you from breaking the loop. And this is where Deathloop really comes alive, as Juliana is really the biggest threat you have from resetting any progress and losing your residium and therefore not getting stronger when you die. Balancing the objectives at hand while watching out for another player potentially lining you up in their sniper sights from afar brings about a certain palm-sweating tension that ups the stakes massively. This unpredictable element easily makes for the best unscripted moments in the game, as you and the other player constantly trying to outsmart each other using the knowledge that you've learned from your many runs in these levels, as well as the loadout that you've amassed over the course of the game so far. It's the perfect mesh of just chaos. Playing as Juliana is a whole other mode as well, and you're giving a wealth of new abilities to make the most of your Predator playstyle. One, for instance, allows you to take on the appearance of NPCs, allowing you to get close to your target, kind of Assassin's Creed multiplayer style. It's really cool. It can be incredibly thrilling, and it makes Juliana as much of a threat as she suggests she is in her rapport with Colt during the game. The plot itself, which I won't dare even try to spoil here, is as winding and as satisfying as you'd hope as well. Coming to understand who these visionaries are, what their relationships with each other are, why only Colt and Juliana know they're in a time loop, and more, all offer solid narrative drives to keep on playing. And the fact that all of this is told mostly through environmental storytelling, journal entries, and gameplay itself makes it even more impressive. As a next-gen PS5 game, Deathloop makes great use of the DualSense controller as well. Something as simple as simulating left and right footsteps on the respective parts of the controller awards Colt with a physical presence in the world and provides players with a sense of tactility that may have been missing otherwise. Similarly, an impressive use of the inbuilt microphone makes Juliana's dialogue feel more intimate and familiar than it might have been if it was just coming out the screen. Visually, the game makes the most of its distinct aesthetic as well. It's not the best looking game on the PS5 by a wide margin, and it's not the most technically impressive visually, but it's proof that having a solid art style trumps pure raw processing data any day of the week. The title also comes with 3 different graphical modes, one which prioritizes a steady 60 frames per second, one which targets 4K and targets 60 frames per second but does have some drops, and finally a ray tracing mode that obviously has ray tracing effects but is also capped at 30 frames per second. Now, of course, which of these you choose is going to be personal preference, but for me, the best mode to play on, and coincidentally, the mode that the game starts on by default, is the performance mode, which sticks to a solid 60 frames per second and ultimately makes for smoother, more enjoyable combat, which for me trumped the benefits of ray tracing, which weren't as impressive as I've personally seen in other video games. Overall, Deathloop is a confident, incredibly memorable action game that rewards you for being as creative and inventive as possible. Its massive systems can be tricky to fully grasp and be a little bit overwhelming in the early hours, but once you get to grips with them, it makes for such an enjoyable game of cause and effect that you just can't wait to exploit every single time you start a new day. I got lost in its world for hours at a time, and every reset didn't feel like I was kind of wasting my time or losing progress, but actually providing me with an opportunity to use what I'd learned in the previous run to make something really memorable this time around. Throw in some absolutely superb multiplayer invasion gameplay and you're bound to leave Deathloop with some of the most memorable gaming moments of the entire year. For me then, it gets a hugely recommendable 4 out of 5 stars, but I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. By the time this goes up, you might have even played Deathloop, so I want to know how you are getting on, and if this review and others have maybe convinced you to pick it up. While you're down there as well, could you please give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to WhatCulture.com for more lists and news and Deathloop content like this coming very soon. Even if you don't know, I've been Josh. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Also, apologies if I sounded a little bit off in this video. I was actually ill at the weekend and I just played Deathloop one day for 10 hours straight because I wasn't in work and I had a headache, which probably isn't like the most ideal way to play this game, but it's what I did, so enjoy.